the book of Kings, there's a story about a king, King Ahab. And near King Ahab is a peasant named Naboth. And Naboth owns a vineyard. And one day, King Ahab is walking and he sees Naboth's vineyard. He thinks to himself, that would be a great place for a vegetable garden. And so Ahab goes and he talks to Naboth. And King Ahab says, Naboth, I will buy your vineyard from you, and I will pay you whatever it is worth. And Naboth says, I can't do that. This vineyard was passed down to me from my ancestors. King Ahab says, well then, I will give you a better vineyard. And Naboth says, I can't do that. This vineyard was passed down to me from my ancestors. I cannot give it away. And King Ahab is angry and frustrated, and he goes home, and the story says he sulks in his bed. And while he's sulking, his queen comes in, Queen Jezebel. And she asks him why he's sulking, and he says, well, Naboth just won't sell me my vineyard. She says, this is how the king of Israel acts? She says, I will get you your vineyard. And so she writes a letter to the elders of the town. And they hold a big feast, and they seat Naboth at the place of honor. And across from Naboth are seated 2 thugs. And during the feast, charges are brought against Naboth of cursing God and cursing the king, and Naboth is brought outside the city, and he's stoned until he's dead. And Queen Jezebel says to Ahab, go, Naboth is dead. The vineyard is yours. So Naboth goes, and he takes the vineyard. It is a nasty, brutal abuse of power. It seems to me that in this world there is a spectrum between the people who are like King Ahab and the people who are like the faithful peasant Naboth. There are people who have a voice and have authority and influence and money, and they are like King Ahab. And then there are those who are the poor and the downtrodden and the oppressed and the voiceless, and they are like Naboth. King Ahabs and Naboths have existed throughout time, and they exist now. Think about the Israelites in ancient Egypt, the early Christians in Rome, the Jews in Nazi Germany. Or think about the Libyans under Gaddafi, the Aboriginal people under colonial rule, fast food workers under corporate rule, immigrants in 21st century North America and Europe. For a long, long time, I thought I was a Naboth. I thought that I had no influence, no power, no authority, and no voice. When I heard the words of Jesus that said, turn the other cheek, walk the extra mile, give your other cloak, I thought those were words of instruction for me. And when Jesus said, blessed are the poor and the meek and the peacemakers and the merciful and the persecuted, I thought those were words of hope and encouragement for me. Until I realized I was wrong. And those words were never meant for me. I have power, and I use it to oppress. I have a voice, and I use it to take away the voice of the other. I have authority, and I use it to judge and condemn. Turning the other cheek, walking the extra mile, giving the other cloak. Being blessed if you are poor and meek and merciful and a peacemaker and persecuted, those words were not for me. I am like King Ahab. I grew up in a town that exists on a land that I'm sure was once very beautiful. The forests were full of wildlife, the rivers teeming with fish, and the climate good to grow all sorts of crops. The Aboriginal people who lived there, they loved the land and cared deeply for the land. And then some white settlers came along, and they cut down the forests, they poisoned the river, and the Aboriginal people, they were relegated to a small slice of land, a fraction of the size of what they once traveled. And I benefited from that oppression. And I still do. I am more like King Ahab than I'd like to admit. When I was thinking about King Ahab and Naboth, I was in a coffee shop writing. I'd been there for a long time, and so had a guy who looked like he was off the street. While I was ordering my second coffee, he was being escorted out by police. And of course, I said nothing. Because in truth, I like my coffee shop's homeless man free. I'm more like King Ahab than I'd like to admit. My cell phone was made with minerals mined by warlords who profit from the sales. Workers making less than a minimum wage made my clothes. The workers who cultivated the bananas I eat for breakfast, they're poisoned by the chemicals used to grow them. My car is powered by fossil fuel extracted from now devastated landscapes, and my food travels 9,000 miles to my table. In each of those relationships, I benefit from the oppression of the other, just like King Ahab benefited from the oppression of Naboth. I have a voice, and I have power and authority and influence. More often than not, I am the one slapping someone on the cheek. I am the one forcing someone to walk a mile. I am the one suing for the cloak. Those words of Jesus, I don't know if they were for me. There's a storyteller and theologian by the name of Peter Rollins. And he imagines that during the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus stops and he turns to the people in the West and he says to them, "Your task is infinitely more difficult. There will come a time when those you treat as enemies and slaves will treat you with nothing but love in return. When you slap someone on the cheek, be prepared, for they will turn their left cheek toward you. When you sue someone for their cloak, they will give you their tunic. When you force someone to walk a mile with your possessions, they will freely carry them for two. They will treat you as they long to be treated. You will judge them, but they will not judge you. You will condemn them, but they will not condemn you." I would love to experience that kind of grace. But in truth, I love my power and my influence and my authority too much. I am too much like King Ahab. And I don't know what to do.